When I first went into the research, I thought I was going to come out saying, hey, e-commerce should sit here. This is how it should look. And what I actually found is that asking where e-commerce sits in the org is the wrong question. And we should actually be asking, how are we changing the way we work to better fit the consumer and how they shop? And that's a really big pivot.
Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast brought to you by Flywheel. My name is Emma Irwin, and I am your host for this series. Today, we are talking all about the omnichannel orgs of the future, specifically digging into the Digital Shelf Institute's latest report, Reinventing the Organization for Omnichannel Success. But to be an omnichannel org of the future, you need to know what it takes, and you probably need to reinvent yourself a bit. So that's why I'm excited to welcome today's guest onto the show to talk about her recent research on all of the above. Without further ado, let's meet her.
Thanks for having me, Emma. My name is Lauren Leveck-Gilbert, and I'm the Executive Director of the Digital Shelf Institute. So a little bit about me and my background. I come from the brand world. So I used to lead the digital shelf at Johnson & Johnson when I was there, and I owned the strategy, the process, the teams, everything from start to finish. And this was before COVID, when e-commerce wasn't as big as it is now. So there were definitely a lot of knocking on doors and learning and teaching. And now I lead the Digital Shelf Institute, which is a commerce community. So it's free to join at digitalshelfinstitute.org. I will give myself a little plug. But we focus on creating content, helping brands in seat today do their job better, and building out frameworks, best practices, and connecting you with others that are doing your job today.
I love it. And a question we ask every single person is, what is the last thing you purchased online?
Yes, dog toys. So if anybody follows me, I have a very large dog, a Rhodesian Ridgeback.
Oh my goodness.
And he goes through toys like nobody's business. So we bought him 3 more Benny Bones, which will be gone in 2 weeks. So
that's impressive. I have like 5 Benny Bones, and we call them car bones because like my dogs love to just bring them in the car and then have a sensory moment on long drives. But it takes them, I think, like a year to get through them. So they're not quite as powerful as your Rhodesian Ridgeback.
I should buy stock in Benny Bone. Let's just say that.
All right, so today your episode structure is as follows. We're going to first cover the inspiration and methodology of the Reinventing the Organization for Omnichannel Success report. Then we'll talk about why building for the future is so important and the gaps that exist on an org's journey to building for that future. We'll then talk about the mindset shifts that need to happen, and we'll wrap it up by covering Lauren's proposed models for the omnichannel orgs of the future. By the way, you can find a link to this report in the episode description. Okay, starting with the inspiration and methodology of this research.
Yeah, so I feel like I have been wanting to write this report for years, if I'm being honest. When I was in seat at a brand, it was hard to determine what our org structure should look like, how many people we needed, where we sat in the org. And it's the number one question I get asked by brands today, still, even for the past 5 years, because it's challenging, right? And you want to make sure that you have the right alignment and leadership buy-in and understanding of the org to do it correctly. So I felt that it was the time to talk about this, especially in the wake of AI and how it's really changing the way we're working now and going to continue to change the way we work. So I really set out on a mission to define kind of what that reinvented org structure looks like. And what's funny is when I first went into the research, I thought I was going to come out saying, hey, e-commerce should sit here. This is how it should look. And what I actually found is that asking where e-commerce sits in the org is the wrong question. And we should actually be asking, how are we changing the way we work to better fit the consumer and how they shop? And that's a really big pivot. And so I had a lot of conversations. I met with over 30 digital leaders across the org. So e-commerce, legal, supply chain, procurement, category management, shopper marketing, retail media. Like I really went cross-functional because we both know e-commerce is super cross-functional. And then we also did a survey of around 100 digital leaders. So we have a lot of really great data to support us.
Now that we're all on the same page and you have some context as to what you've pressed the play button on, let's highlight the key themes from the report, starting with building for the future. So I'm going to start off with where the current gaps are when it comes to trying to build an omni-channel organization. Like, can you highlight what you've defined as those gaps that are in those existing structures and why they exist?
Yeah, well, I think the gaps are really more focused on kind of why we're at this inflection point and why there is such a change that needs to be made. And I think one of the big ones is the fact that most organizations have been built for in-store shopping, right? I mean, in-store shopping's been around for hundreds of years and they're still set up that way with supply chain and manufacturing and marketing, and a lot of their functions match that in-store selling model. But we both know, we all know, everyone listening knows that shoppers are omnichannel and they shop on multiple different channels. They don't just shop in store, even though it still is a big channel for them. So I think that's one of the big gaps we see in terms of org structure. The other piece is the pace of change. So when you think about traditional in-store shopping, you have your planogram, which is kind of how the shelf looks, and there's a lot of science behind it. Like, I am not discounting. It is really challenging to figure out planograms in store, but you change them maybe 2-3 times a year. Last year alone, Amazon changed their requirements 244 times.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
is a significant difference in the pace of change, right? And think about an organization that's not set up for that kind of change. So that's a really big call to action. I also think things like increasing competition. Some of the big name brands are being beat out by these small, digitally native brands that started a couple of months ago, right? Your competition is coming from different places than it has been in the past. And in order to be able to compete, you can't just add people. You can't just add 15 more people to help you do these things, right? Like, it's just not sustainable. And then you think about the retail media side of things, where retailers are now becoming media companies and they're asking for more money and more budget. And so the cost structure is changing. So those are just really kind of some of the drivers that we're seeing in our industry that's really driving this very big gap between where organizations are today and where they need to be in order to really be successful.
Got it. And I would love to know, in the report, you break out these like e-com capabilities that are urgently needed. And can you tell me some, I guess, actually, which ones are the most pressing in your opinion when it comes to, okay, we have this problem, the pace of change, but like, what do we need right this second in terms of those capabilities?
So in the report, there's a bunch of like key tenets that I've built out in terms of what you can start doing now. If I had to pick one, I would say shared goals. And what I mean by that is, right now, most organizations are built around more of like a functional siloed model, right? So sales has their goals, marketing has their goals, supply chain has their goals, and they don't really cut across. What you're doing is you're basically putting each of those functions as separate teams going against each other. So shared goals brings all of those functions together and has them march towards a North Star. So it can be something as simple as, I'm making this up, we want our e-commerce sales percentage to be at 20% in the next 3 years, right? Then all of the functions that influence that metric need to have a goal that's connected to their bonus that they then need to focus on to get to that goal. Instead of sales having their in-store number, marketing having their number, and supply chain having their number. That shared goals gives everybody one thing to march towards, and you're all on the same team. And the data from the report shows that organizations that have shared goals have a stronger percentage of e-commerce sales. So it does correlate, because obviously you're working towards the same thing. So if I had to pick one, that would be my one.
I'd love to know, is there one of those tenets that you think is the most underrated if it's not also shared goals?
Underrated. That's a good question. I think that, I don't know if this is necessarily underrated or more not realized. And I think it's balancing the short-term pressure versus the long-term vision. I think a lot of what we see today, and I think it's because we are in a very challenging economic environment and there's a demand to see profits. I think there's a very big focus on short-term goals. And that actually can really hurt a lot of brands when you're thinking about the long term. And it truly is a balance, right? Like, especially if you're a public company, you have to report numbers, but you also can't not do something because it's going to take too long to see the benefit. So I think it's really kind of balancing both the short term and the long term and getting the leadership on board for what that looks like. Because if you think about things like search or things like just e-commerce in general, you might not see an immediate result from a retail media ad or for some campaign you did on e-commerce, but you might see something in 6 months or 12 months because it takes time to get it in the algorithm, or it takes time to see the results of a campaign that you ran, right? So it's just really recognizing, wait, do we have the right strategy for now and for the future?
Got it. And before we press record, we were talking about like there's kind of a lack of talent and there just isn't enough talent to support the needs. So I'm in what you just said, I'm curious, like imagine we had all the talent in the world. Does that actually solve the issues if you just take all these talented people and insert them into these organizations?
No. And I wish the answer was yes. I mean, I do agree with you, Emma. We have a talent problem. I think we need to think about, and in the report, I talk about this a lot, like thinking about training and career development. There needs to be a change in that. But this isn't necessarily just a people problem, because the whole concept of this reinvented organization of the future is introducing a new type of model that says instead of integrating e-commerce into the org, you actually need to start changing the way you're working. Let's say, for example, in your scenario, Emma, we have 15 amazingly talented omnichannel professionals. And we bring them into an organization and we say, like, go. Like, you're on the e-commerce team, like, let's figure this out. They might not be set up for success because the processes, the ways of working, ingrained structure of the organization is built for in-store. So you're integrating omnichannel into something that is not built for it. So it's this kind of like unraveling of ways of working into kind of changing the way you're thinking. And this can be scary when people are listening because, yes, I am saying you need to change a lot of things, but I'm not saying you have to change them all now. And those key tenets I talked about, you just start with a couple, right? Apply shared goals. Change the way that you're developing your talent and recruiting for leaders. Like, there's small changes that you can make, but we just kind of need to crack the mold a little bit and start thinking differently.
On the topic of starting to think differently, our next section is kind of talking about mindset shifts that need to happen, because I think like a lot of people recognize there's a problem, but as you said, there's something blocking the actual ability to want to change. So I'm kind of curious, are there any other, or maybe more holistically, just like mindset shifts that need to occur in order to actually put the needed change into motion?
Yeah, so I think before you even think about making some of those big changes, the fundamentals need to be in place. I mean, we already talked kind of about shared goals. I think another one is change management. We're talking about change, and inherently humans don't like change. Like, it's just a fact, right? Like, and it's hard, it takes time. You need people to understand why it's happening. So just having change management in place. And I think anybody who went through the school of e-commerce over the past 31 years that it's been around, we understand that there's so much change management that needs to happen. So organizations that understand that, because we're all human and we need to understand this change, have a change management plan, have places that people can ask questions, make sure that top down, bottoms up, across, everybody's on board and everybody understands why this change is happening. So I would say that. And then another one, Emma, I know you and I were talking about, is education. Education is really important. I just talked about kind of infusing a new way of thinking into the organization. Think about the people that have maybe worked at a company for 15 to 25 years. They might not understand this new way of working. So let's educate them. Let's help them understand, because they play a very big part in this change, but they need to understand why they're important in this change and how they're important in this change. So that education element is really, really, really critical. And I think the challenge with education is it doesn't end. It's not like you can just go and say, hey, this is how it works, because our industry just moves so quickly and there's big changes that happen. So it's really an ongoing education type of thing. And kind of setting that in motion now is really important.
What will separate the organizations that actually make omnichannel work beyond just being like, oh, yeah, we understand we need change. We're going to do some mindset shifts. I'm curious for some more tactical kind of what's going to set them apart.
Yeah. So one of the things I kind of thought about as I was going through this research is like, what does painting a picture of a profitable omnichannel business look like? So, couple key tenets, or excuse me, key principles. I have 11 key tenets in here, and then these are the key principles.
Yep.
It's a long report and there's a lot of meat to it. I encourage everyone to download it. It's free. But the kind of painting the picture of what that future looks like. Agile decision making. Being able to make changes as the industry and as the consumer changes. And in order to do that, you have to have the right process, you have to have the right people, you have to be metrics on the right things. But agile decision making is one. Shared goals and accountability. I'm not going to go into that one. I think I've covered that one.
Agreed.
Cross-functional alignment around a unified strategy. So again, marching towards a North Star and getting all of the right functions on board. So I know we were talking about retail media before we started, right? A perfect example of that is if you run a retail media ad and it's connected to a PDP with no image that is not built out, why would someone buy that product, right? But that's an internal team collaboration issue, right? You need the retail media team, potentially the shopper marketing team, you need the digital shelf or the e-commerce team. You need all of those people talking to each other so that effort is collective and is going to the consumer as one campaign versus those 6 teams that worked on it. So getting that cross-functional alignment is really, really important. Then data. I mean, that's a really big one, right? Understanding who your consumer is, what they want, how they shop, using that data to actually make informed decisions. And I think that's where AI can really help a lot because we all have a lot of data. And then last but not least, consumer and customer centricity. So from a consumer standpoint, they're the ones buying your product. So they should be dictating a lot about what you're doing, where you're selling things, how you're selling things, but also your customer being your retailers, right? So the Amazon, Walmarts, Targets, Krogers of the world, how are you showing up to them as one company? And how are you thinking about helping to drive their category forward, right? So really keeping the consumer and your customer at the center in terms of the decisions you're making, because I get it. Listen, I was on the brand side. It's really easy to sit with your team and say, oh my gosh, this ad campaign is amazing. We love it. It's great. And then sit in your bubble and forget that things are changing out there with how consumers are experiencing or shopping.
For sure. Okay. I'm going to move us into the most exciting part, in my opinion, of this report, because not only did you research what's not working and what philosophically and tactically needs to change within these orgs of the future, but you actually proposed solutions and multiple solutions and wrote out models that that organizations can adapt going forward, which kudos to you, because so much research does not actually propose a solution. It just points out what's wrong. It's like, we've established that this is wrong. And you read it, and especially as a large organization, you're like, cool, now what? So before we get into those specific proposed models, I'm wondering, can you walk us through some of the core principles that guided the development of those models, if you haven't touched on those already?
Yeah, sure, of course. So thank you, Emma. That's one of the things I'm really excited about this report. It actually breaks down specific models. And the fun fact is that there will be even more parts of this report coming out in the next couple of months. So maybe I'll come back and talk about it, but there'll be even more double clicks into it. But basically, I spoke with multiple brands, and some of these models exist today in some organizations, and you can see they were quoted in the research. And some of them are kind of the AI org of the future, where pieces of it are happening today, and others are kind of a combination of some models that I've seen work really well. So there's kind of the AI future model where nobody really knows like what that AI future model looks like, but there's some piece of it today that do exist in pockets that I've seen. And it's just kind of an idea of what it could look like. And then you have the dynamic shared ownership model, which is actually in place today by Bear. And they speak very publicly about it. You should definitely research it and look it up. And then the agile pod model is a very popular model that some organizations are using today, as well as kind of the single brand model. So I basically took examples of companies that are using this today, added in some elements of what kind of might be changing, and then have a hypothetical model for the AI future.
Got it. In all of your research, do any of the models stand out as what you think is going to be more successful in the future? Or is that like too broad of a question because every organization is totally different and they need to be kind of custom fit?
Well, I'm actually really glad you asked that question because the answer is it needs to be custom fit to the organization. Yeah. And I think that should be really kind of the key takeaway for anybody reading this report. There is no right answer. And that's why instead of me saying, here's what your org should look like, I built out those key tenets because as long as you get the tenets right, the model doesn't necessarily matter, right? Because every organization has a different motivator, has a different culture, is global versus regional, has different types of products versus categories, right? So no one can really sit and say like, here is what your org should be. But there are some common themes for any org that is doing really well and is set up for the future. So for anybody who's kind of reading it or wants to dive into it more, I would focus more on kind of the key tenets and what you can change now. And then look at the models as like inspiration to understand how people are working. But org design is hard, right? Like Emma, you and I could sit here and say, hey, you should have X number of people and they should report to this side and it should all look like this. But it's very, very complex. And I really hit on kind of the high level pieces of this. You can go quite deep in terms of org structure. And there are amazing consulting companies that do that. The whole point of this was really to kind of hit on common themes, some examples to kind of guide your conversation. There's going to be a kind of double click that comes out in like October, November timeframe around this report where I actually build out examples of org structures of today, because this piece is really focused on the fact that we should not be asking the question, where does e-commerce sit? But this also really depends on your maturity, right? If you're an organization that just started focusing on e-commerce, you should not be totally reinventing things, right? Like maybe you start small and you think about, yeah, you should have one or two e-commerce people. They should sit in sales or marketing, right? So it is based on kind of your level of maturity. But even when I was looking at existing models today, a lot of people say like, hey, should it sit in sales or should it sit in marketing? And my answer, excuse me, my answer is, well, are you a sales driven or a marketing driven organization? And you know, when you think about that logically, people are like, well, duh, I'm a sales driven organization. But a lot of people answer that they're marketing driven. So it also depends on your motivations.
For sure. I have one more report related question for you, and then we can wrap things up. But I'm curious, after, I guess I'll also ask you for closing thoughts if you want to give any that you haven't covered. But in listening to you talk, of all the people that you interviewed, are you hopeful for the future, or did doing this research kind of have you like, oh my God, how is everything so different? This is frustrating. How are we still kind of stuck? Or are you more hopeful for the future?
You know, I am hopeful that the inflection point of where we are today in terms of our economic instability, the increase in usage of AI, I think it's going to be a motivator that people have to change. I don't think we've ever been at a point where the need for change is so strong. Like if I think about when COVID is a great example of that, right? Like the need for e-commerce transformation was so strong that it happened. Like I think we're at that same inflection point here where a lot of large brands specifically need to see more profitability and growth. And in order for them to do that, they need to change the way they're doing things. And so the people I talked to, it was really exciting to hear that they want to change things and they were really excited about this report and they were excited about the research. I think the challenge is going to be like really starting to make these changes. But what gives me a lot of hope, Emma, is one of the key tenets, and we didn't mention this, but it's creating joint commercial leadership So one leader who owns sales and marketing. And since this research came out, I've seen 2 or 3 organizations that just put a chief growth officer in place. And so they're kind of owning sales and marketing. So we're seeing that change happen slowly. So I'm definitely hopeful, but I really just want this to be a call to action. Like, things need to change. We cannot keep operating for in-store.
And with that, we've made it to the end of our conversation on the Reinventing the Organization for Omnichannel Success report.
Oh, Emma, can I just give a plug for where they can find the research? Sorry.
That would be useful. Yeah, you sure can.
So for anyone who wants to read the research, digitalshelfinstitute.org, just click on resources, and it's the second thing to click there, Reinvented Org of the Future, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am very passionate about this topic and happy to talk about it, and I hope you enjoy.
Okay, now we can actually wrap up. But before I could let Lauren leave the recording, I had to ask her, what's on her digital wish list?
It's funny, I was thinking about this question. It is actually a motor for my paddleboard. So I do a lot of...
They make that?
They do. So I have a blow up stand up paddleboard, and I do like a lot of paddleboarding, and I've been going a lot recently. And my paddleboard has a detachable fin. And the other day I got caught in the lake, and it was so windy, and it took me an hour to get back to shore. And I was like, would really love this motor for my paddleboard that I could just turn on. But, I need to get the exercise, so I haven't bought it.
I love it. What a unique answer. And now I know that you can put a motor on a paddleboard, but I could also see that it's there for emergencies, okay? It's there for when I'm stuck and I am working against the wind and the wind happens to be stronger than me.
Yes, that's why I paddleboard in lakes and not in the ocean.
And that officially wraps up another episode of the Commerce Collective podcast. Thank you to Lauren for walking us through her robust report, which you should definitely check out. And if you're not actively following what the Digital Shelf Institute is up to, you should get on that. I discovered their work in college and followed along ever since, which means that you absolutely should too. I have been your host, Emma Irwin. I'm just about ready to reinvent an organization for omnichannel success, and I'll see you next time.